hear the word karma, you might immediately think of Eastern philosophies, mystical teachings, or spiritual beliefs passed down through cultures. Maybe it sounds like a cliché to you, maybe even like a comforting story people tell themselves when they don't have control over life's injustices. Forget all of that for a moment. Set aside everything you think you know. Because I want to talk about karma in a completely different way, like a law of nature, not a belief system, not a religious idea, but something as consistent, as undeniable, and as neutral as gravity. When you throw a ball into the air, what happens? It comes back down. Not because you believe it will, not because you hope it will, but because that is how the system works. Gravity is not a philosophy, it is a law. Now imagine that your intentions, your actions, your words, and even your emotional energy operate under a similar principle, a kind of invisible return mechanism. We can call it the cosmic boomerang. Everything you throw into the world, every action, every intention, every harm, every kindness eventually returns to its always, without exception. This is not probability, it is structure. Someone who harms you might feel victorious in the moment. They may believe they have won, dominated, or escaped consequence. But the nature of a boomerang is simple. It completes its arc and returns to the hand that threw. Not always immediately, not always visibly, but inevitably. But how does this return actually work? Not through magic, not through supernatural punishment. It operates on a deeper psychological and existential level. The psychologist Carl Jung referred to the shadow, the hidden, suppressed and unacknowledged parts of the human psyche. Every person carries a shadow of anger, envy, selfishness, cruelty, unresolved emotional dark. When someone intentionally harms another person, they are not only affecting the outside world, they are also reinforcing their own shadow. They are strengthening internal fragmentation. They are training their mind to accept distortion as normal. And that is where the boomerang begins its return journey. Not as an external punishment first, but as an internal consequence. Because every harmful action slightly reshapes the psyche of the one who commits it. It alters their sense of trust, empathy, and self-perception. Even if they appear successful, even if they seem untouched, something begins to shift inside, a subtle discomfort, emotional instability, and a quiet disconnection from inner peace. They may not recognize it immediately, they may even deny it for years, but it accumulates, like invisible weight. 1. The collapse of trust, the first return. One of the first consequences of intentional harm is the destruction of trust. When someone betrays another person, they are not just breaking the bond, they are breaking their own relationship with trust itself. They take a symbolic key from another person's emotional world, enter it, and destroy what was. But here is a deeper consequence. A person who destroys trust in others eventually loses the ability to experience trust themselves. Not because the world changes, but because their perception does. They begin to project their own inner darkness onto everyone else. They suspect hidden motives everywhere. They interpret kindness as manipulation and sincerity as strategy. Their world becomes a stage filled with potential threats. They may still be surrounded by people, but emotionally, they are isolated. Quiet loneliness forms, not necessarily physical solitude, but existential separation, a feeling of being fundamentally disconnected from genuine human connect. And this becomes their first internal prison. 2. The broken mirror, the collapse of clarity. The second return of the boomerang is psychological distortion. When someone repeatedly justifies harm, they begin to reshape their own narrative. They must continuously rationalize their behavior to protect their self-image. Carl Jung also described the persona the mask people wear to function socially. But when that mask becomes too dominant, a dangerous split occurs between who a person is and who they pretend to. Eventually, the mirror cracks. They no longer see themselves clearly. Instead, they see a distortive reflection, fragmented justification, selective memory, and emotional This is not simple guilt. It is a deeper psychological conflict. Unresolved contradiction slowly turns into anxiety, restlessness without reason, emotional unease even in moments of success. They might achieve things externally: wealth, status, recognition, but internally they are engaged in a silent war with themselves. Because the mind does not forget, it suppresses. And what is suppressed does not disappear, it grows. So even in their happiest moments, a subtle discomfort follows them, a sense that something is unresolved, something unfinished, something unhealed. This is the second return of the boomerang: inner instability disguised as normal life. 3. The loss of meaning, the final return. The third and most severe consequence is not emotional or psychological, it is existential. When a person repeatedly harms others, distorts truth and destroys connection, something deeper erodes meaning. At first, life still feels functional, goals remain, achievements continue, external validation may even increase. But gradually, something changes. Success stops feeling like success. Pleasure loses depth. Accomplishment becomes hollow. And one day, a question appears quietly ever so. What is all of this actually for? This is what can be called the void of meaning, a state where life continues significance. Carl Jung emphasized that humans are fundamentally driven by meaning. Without meaning, existence becomes psychologically unsustainable. At this stage, the person is not necessarily suffering in dramatic ways. There is no obvious collapse, no visible destruction. Instead, there is emptiness inside abundance, a strange emotional numbness, a life that looks complete from the outside but feels empty from within. This is the final return of the cosmic boomerang: existence without fulfillment. The realization. At some point, such a person may look at their life and realize something unsettling. They have everything but feel nothing. And in that silence, the truth becomes unavoidable. You cannot destroy meaning in others without losing it yourself. A different perspective on justice. The idea of cosmic boomerang is not about a supernatural force actively punishing people. It is closer to a system of psychological and existential consequences built into human nature itself. Breaking trust leads to isolation. Distorting truth leads to anxiety. Destroying meaning leads to emptiness. Not as mystical punishment, but as internal cause and effect. Meanwhile, the person who is harmed is not defined by that harm forever. They can heal. They can rebuild trust. They can grow stronger, more aware and more resilient. Because they were wounded but not transformed into the one who caused the wound. And that distinction matters. The final shift. Perhaps the most important realization is this. Watching others for justice, waiting for consequences, or mentally tracking their downfall keeps you tied to the very past you were trying to. The real shift happens elsewhere. Not not in observing their return but in continuing your own forward movement. Healing becomes its own form of resolution. Growth becomes its own form of closure. And rebuilding your life becomes the only meaningful response that does not depend on anyone else. Because in the end, the most powerful outcome is not revenge. It is silence where pain used to be. It is clarity where confusion once lived. It is peace that does not require validation. And that is where the story truly changes, not in what happens to others, but in what you choose to become after everything that happened.